Jesus, that's a hard name.
Welcome back to Girls Talk Comics. This is your master of mediocrity, Erin.
And your lieutenant literature, Jessica.
And today we are talking about Batman White Knight.
Not that kind of White Knight, but yeah, that kind of White Knight.
You got the double entendre of the title. I appreciate it. It is spelled Knight, but when you read it, what does it mean?
What does it mean? It seems like it means...
There's a lot. I think
all of the things. It means a lot of things.
It means a lot of things. So let me give a little spiel about it. This Batman White Knight is a limited series, 8-part Batman series that is not connected to the main canon comic line. It was written,
unfortunately,
girl. So it was done in 2017, 8-part series. It's a great book that kind of talks about what happens when Batman goes a little too far and Joker goes sane.
What?
Yeah. Right in like the first part of this first issue of this series, Batman is chasing Joker down. Batman snaps. They end up somewhere in a storage for old medications, and when Batman finally loses it, he's shoving pills down Joker's throat. Joker's choking. There's media catching this. Turns out those were experimental drugs that make Joker go sane.
What?
Yeah, so this becomes like a role reversal story. You have Joker, who's this victim of a vigilante, who's pushing to do some really great work.
Yeah.
Like, his character, it really does get you. Like, this entire story is fantastic. And critics recognize that, too. It was well received by critics. So far, hasn't won any awards, but it was really well done.
Also, it seems to be like, it's not main canon, but it references other non-main canon things.
Yeah, I think it references Killing Joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, it totally does. It's got really cool. It ties a lot of really great stories together. Mm-hmm. It was a top 10 bestseller during its run, getting multiple reprintings. Number 1 got 4 printings. Yes. The second issue got 3, and third and fourth issues got 2 printings, and that's huge for comics. So good job, Sean Murphy and Matt Hollingsworth. Did great stuff. Sean Murphy even did other things, like he did an older Hellblazer series. He did Teen Titans and Punk Rock Jesus. He did really great work.
Well, and I was looking it up right now. I like the coloring in it too. So Matt Hollingsworth did a good job.
Yeah.
Go you, Matt Hollingsworth.
I like how he does the shading. One thing that I really love when artists do is when they vary the amount of detail they put in things. I understand you have to do that. But narratively, I think this is done really well. It's mostly dark. It's a very dark, visually, it's a dark comic. But it's got some really great characters. So they introduced Neo Joker, or they have Neo Joker in this book as well. Mm-hmm. And Neo Joker's origin is pretty darn cool. And I think we'll talk about that actually a little bit.
Does Neo Joker come anywhere else in like the main series? Like the main?
I couldn't actually tell you because I don't read the main series, but we can look up some history of Neo Joker. The Neo Joker shows up in Batman White Knight as the main villain. That is her origin. So let's talk about Neo Joker a little bit. So Jack Napier is Joker's real name, and when Joker allegedly
in some versions of comics, which we're building off of with this one. Sorry, continue.
So Jack Napier, when he comes solo, he goes up to Harley, and this Harley is based off of the current Harley design, that Suicide Squad design, that newer fishnets, short shorts, pigtail kind of design. Yeah. So he finally sits with her and is like, "Baby, we need to actually get married," and she.
Because he's sane now. He's sane. He's coming home to Harley.
He's like, "You've done so much for me. Let's do it."
This is what you always wanted.
And she does not respond well. Turns out she's not the original Harley we knew and fell in love with the Batman animated series. She is somebody who also had Stockholm Syndrome that Joker adopted from a bank robbery after the original Harley left. And even then, Jack Napier and Harley have this beautiful conversation about how, he was so obsessed with stopping Batman. And after everything he did to Robin, she was like, "I couldn't be there for it." And she left, and she was like, "You didn't even notice." But Harley comes back. Original Harley comes back.
In her original costume.
In her original costume,
it's
y'all.
The greatest reveal.
Oh, such a good feeling.
With hyenas, like, I love her. I love her so much.
Phenomenal. And pretty much it's Jack Napier and Harley Quinn back together again.
Power couple.
Harley Quinn is back, and it's sweet, and she's helping him kind of take over the city in a, I don't like to use the word sane, but in a sane, composed way that people can accept. Yeah, there we go. Neurotypical way that people are accepting and empathizing with.
And that's the biggest thing of this whole series for me, for this whole limited run for me, was that, God, you're just so anti-Batman on the whole thing. It kind of brings up all of the stuff that was triggered by those movies, you know? Like, the movies, that trilogy that came out when I was in high school, the Dark Knight series with the amazing Heath Ledger being the Joker. Like, it did some stuff to the canon in my head, because I don't read the comics, but it did some stuff to the canon in my head that made me feel very dirty about Batman. Like, he became a 1%er in my head in a bad way. That is like the modern taking of rich people, is that they're evil and we should eat them. And so this thing, whenever I was reading this thing, it felt like it was addressing the older 90s movies. It felt like it was addressing the Dark Knight movies. It felt like it was addressing the Suicide Squad movies. And it felt like it was like, okay, so what is the modern social political landscape, and who is the bad guy?
Yeah, it does. I think it really talks about, like, the violence that comes with Batman and vigilantism. Like, at what point is it okay to do it? At what point do you push the limit? At what point are you harming others? And so it talks about kind of the complicated nature of Batman, versus the image of Jack Napier, and you get to learn a little bit more about Gotham.
Yeah.
And who, like, what Gotham is. And they also, like, the villains in this, like, Neo Joker's got a badass design, frankly. She does some pretty intense stuff. So they even bring back Mr. Freeze.
And his beautiful wife floating in the big old tank.
I
forgot all about until I was reading this again. I was like, oh fuck yeah, that's a thing.
It's got a really, I can't say complicated, because it does kind of wrap up.
It's nostalgic.
Yeah, it pulls some good themes, and it pulls some good characters together, and it has some really interesting stuff done, and it just changes the nature of Batman, in my opinion. I'm not a main canon person for the Batman series, because I don't know what's in it, and I feel like the main Batman series can be a little bit tame. A lot of the main, because this is part of the DC Black Label, and so they're allowed to be a little bit more creative and be a little bit darker with things like that. But they have some really good design and dialogue throughout it, that I totally recommend. This book gave me goosebumps.
Oh man. And you know, like,
goosebumps.
It's such a morality tale, and I feel like that's what I always thought Batman was, but then whenever you read stuff outside of canon, I think that's what it does outside of canon, but I don't know that it does that in canon anymore. And I don't know. I don't read canon, so I can't really speak to that, but I love it when it does this, because I 100% hook, line, and sinker followed the narrative the way they wanted me to. Like, I felt what they wanted me to feel all the way up till the end. Like, even when they kind of put a big old bow on it and make you feel good about life again, I was there beat for beat. And sometimes, you know, you see it and you see where the dialogue's going, you see where the narrative's going, and you're like, okay, so they're gonna want me to feel this way, and then it's gonna be a shock, oh, the good guy's actually good, and we've been, like, strung along the whole way, and it doesn't clean up like that. It stays complex even whenever you get back to something closer to the status quo.
So I guess that's a nice transition over into, like, how we recommend reading it. I read it kind of all at once, but I read it slower than I've read a lot of things, because it is easier to find it in a trade than it is in single issues, because again, it's a couple years old. But reading it, like, there's a lot to take in and process, and so it's one I would recommend reading in kind of a single issue pacing, if only so you can process what happens in the issues. Buying it in a collection is going to be easier, potentially cheaper, but I do recommend pacing yourself through it. I had a friend of mine read it, and he said he had to pace himself. Like, he would go to the end of an issue in it and have to put it down to kind of digest.
It is wordy.
Yeah, and it's thematic. Like, it's very kind of heavy in that sense that like it's not one that you can just pick up, breeze through.
Kind of like Sandman in that way too. Like you're reading a lot of text and you're pulling apart a lot of moral quandaries and you're really navigating something that's complex. So yeah, that makes sense. I didn't do that, but I wish I would have because it's a long read.
The story, forget the story a little bit, come back. Yeah. So that's how I recommend reading it. But we never really talked about the women yet.
Oh, well, I kind of, whenever, I don't remember who suggested this, but whenever I was looking at this, I was like, I want to do it because I'm a Joker fan, right? And then I read it, and I was like, oh my god, this is almost entirely about women. This whole comic book is almost entirely about women and sort of their struggles. And,
it was kind of interesting to read it. Like, the emotive conversation was happening from the perspective of women. Like, Sean and Matt really did use minority representation to understand the victimization of Joker and Batman, specifically Batman because he was wealthy. And so there are definitely women who are coming out and being like, you Joker did this and this and this, or you Batman are doing this, this and this. Exactly, and it's even with some POC where like, the rich are doing this, this and this and this. Yeah, and so that the police are doing this, this and this. So that was a really, an actual representation of minority voices by having them quote say it rather than, well, statistically or whatever through the perspective of a white guy. They had it done with like, these are the actual people who are being victimized today.
And I paused earlier. I don't think it does pass the Bechdel test.
I don't think it does either. I don't think the girls actually talk to each other, but like it doesn't. I don't think good representation has to pass the Bechdel test
because the women were done well. Like they were distinctive. They had emotional signatures.
But this was done from Joker and Batman's perspective,
right? So yeah, that I would say I still am 100% on board for this, but because there was like more than at least 50% of the characters who were doing things and creating things and analyzing things. It was equal representation of the genders. It had a good representation of POCs, and like. You had a surprise second Harley Quinn when I thought I was only going to have one when I read this. So, like, hey.
Yeah.
2 Harleys is better than 1, I guess.
Yeah.
There was some, it's a regular.
Pretty male dominated.
Yeah, it's a regular DC book. So even though it does a really, really good job, there's, like, Neo Joker, I love her character. Her origin is a bit it didn't work very hard whenever they were creating this person who would be following in for Harleen Quinzel. Because the thing about Harleen Quinzel is she is a smart, capable woman who falls in love with the wrong person, right? And love her or hate her, comes from a place of strength and maybe some emotional, unstrength, I don't know, weaknesses. There you go. That's the unstrength word is weakness.
Yeah, that's also Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome, yeah, for sure. But then, when they're like, oh, well, you're not Harleen. Who are you? How did you end up here? She's just like, I was going to cut myself and die at work, but then he came and grabbed me and started talking to me like I was somebody else, and I went with it, Which is
that kind of dark, but that's the Harley people have wanted.
Yeah.
That's the Suicide Squad Harley. So it
was a comment on it.
I think it was a critique of it, to some degree of she beats the crap out of Jack Napier.
Yeah, she does. She does.
Because he's not the crazy person she wanted him to be, which is so what people wanted Suicide Harley to be, and so counter to what the Batman animated series would talk about in regards to it. This isn't the Harley that I would go see run off with Poison Ivy.
Right.
And that's the Harley that I love, and I think that's who. But neither of these Harleys are that Harley.
No, neither one are. There is Ivy in here, and she is not addressed in that way, which is kind of sad because it did tie so many of the other things that are my most beloved Batman representations together. The Killing Joke, the Harley Quinn from the original animated series. The things that really felt like they were creating headspace for that character to live in for the rest of my life are the things that it pulled off of.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad that it has to be outside of regular canon in order to have good stories.
Yeah.
Guess what? I think the multiverse is a little shit. Like, the way that they do the major stuff with the DC and Marvel, they're just strapping themselves into some weak literature because they're just juggling so many, like, weights. They don't want to do anything risky with their characters. They don't want to.
But that's how you make money.
That's how you make money. But really, this is the stuff that makes me fall in love with comics.
Oh no, definitely. It's why I prefer smaller series and from more independent publishers.
Yep.
And if there are some people who are in the industry who will talk about that.
Yeah.
They'll talk about it. But I again, the book gave me goosebumps mostly because I do have kind of a professional and personal history with mental health.
Right.
And with social work and social justice, and it's like ominous at the same time because like at first you're reading it when we're going to talk about a little political. Sorry, at first you're reading it and you're hearing Jack Napier say these things, and you're hearing these people come and come around him to support him in this cause, this anti-Batman cause of like we're preventing vigilantism, we hate this exploitation, and how everybody's like, yeah, you're right, but there's also this tone of like moral wrongness with it. So at first I'm reading it thinking like, is this going to be a critique on millennial culture and social justice culture? And it totally has that vibe for a while.
A little bit.
But then, the final issue, when Jack Napier and Batman finally get to talk to each other for the first time alone, and the way they talk to each other, and the way Jack Napier confronts him about a lot of things, it totally undermines that entire vibe. And it totally like pulls everything together in a pretty clear way. It doesn't, not in a forgiving way. I don't think either of them are exonerated of their history, but they totally drive home the complexity of humans and the complexity of this situation, in a just an interesting way where you can tell it's not Sean making a jab at millennials or idealists. It just kind of talks about how they're both cogs in a greater machine,
right? And
they both are representing separate sides of a coin.
And it does so many things with it. Like, the longer I think about it, the more I want to reread it. But and maybe slower this time so that I can actually like think about it while I'm reading it. Yeah. Binge culture, yay. But it does a lot about the basis of his neuroses is basically fandom.
Yeah.
Joker is just a fan, like, of Batman, and you see several panels explicitly showing him in a shrine full of Batman, like, t-shirts and posters and all of the figurines, and like he's just worshiping at the altar of Batman, which is why Harley leaves him.
Yeah. He's also so White Knight has a sequel, Curse of the White Knight. And that one, they set it up pretty okay in this book because Joker talks about how he found Joker at the bottom of Arkham, essentially. So they talk a lot about that more so in Curse of the White Knight than they do in White Knight. But he's like picked up this persona from before, and is pretty much just a fan and obsessing over Batman. Yeah. Which is kind of what Heath Ledger's Batman was like too.
Right, yeah.
So I like that you made that analogy, because that I think really did like tie into it. I don't think they wrote Heath Ledger's Joker.
No, they didn't do that. But when you were talking about the millennial aspect of it, it almost felt like Batman was like Joker in this one was a millennial, and he could be like age range wise in this because guess what, we're old now. But don't let them know. Keep them angry at teenagers.
Right. Let us go.
But that obsession is part of it with me as well, and the fact that like in a lot of ways when you want to do something good, like everybody, the complexity of interpersonal relations is such that even if you want to do good things, you can come across as a dick. Like, if you're like, I want to be there and help support women, and you got a penis and you do it the wrong way, it can cause more problems than it helps. So, like, you're seeing Joker kind of do that a little bit, but, like, in a problematic... In a problematic way, obviously.
And then they reframe Batman in that same context of, like, Batman, you're wealthy and you're wanting to do well, but you're doing a lot of harm, literally, like to people who are poor. Yeah, like, you can't keep doing that, buckaroo.
Which is a good thing in the way that we analyze all of these sacred totems of our culture, because, like, the new Star Wars trilogy did that a little bit too, where they were like, so you don't think the people who are building the space cannons are building them for both sides? Like, there's a housing market that's driven by a bunch of greedy, wealthy people that are just making money off of the fact that Batman goes and wrecks a lot of shit. Yeah. And I love it. I love it.
It's good.
I'm here for it so hard. I'm here for it. Yeah. But I do need to reread it at a slower pace because I have a personal problem with putting things down once I start, and I needed this is complex. This is worth having the book on your shelf to go back and read again, because it's not going to be something that you're like, oh, I got it. It's like, I read it, and then every time you read it, you're going to find something new, which is, I think, like, it's the kind of comic book that makes me love it as much as I love reading books, like science fiction, fantasy books when I was a little girl, because if they do their job well, they're helping you learn things about yourself and the world while you're reading their stuff.
It's good. It's so good. It's good. I mean, I think one quote from Harley, and I flipped to it, but I think it's really great, is it's in reference to Jack Napier and Batman, and it's that maybe if you two weren't so stubborn, you'd realize how similar you've become. So take that as you will. And it's just...
And I don't know, have you read any of the Bad Girl stuff?
No.
No, you haven't? Okay, neither have I, because it looks lame. But I wonder if he did sort of that same thing with Batgirl too, like drawing on sort of the cultural Gaius of it, and kind of helping create a coherent picture, because, God, some of this shit's really opaque, and having outliers like this that create good, clear pictures for casual fans of this shit is just, God, you're doing the Lord's work, Sean Murphy, for real.
He is, and I recommend, if you want, and maybe we can do it as an episode, but The Curse of the White Knight.
I say this is, we've been kind of doing this thing, sneaky, where we keep reading until we hate it. So I think we should do that with this as well, because I loved it.
Good. It's also a limited series, so we can do it in one go. Keep an eye out for that episode.
Keep it tuned in. Tune in and rip off that dial, as they used to say when things were analog.
Things I learned today.
I don't know. Radio stations, maybe.
Maybe. Who knows? Well, thank you for joining us, and please continue to overthink your media. Bye.
Done. Getting things done.
You'll never do
that again.
Never being productive. It doesn't always happen, but cool and welcome back.